how do you actually get a fortune? Well, you had novelists in the 19th century, like Balzac, saying that behind every great family fortune, there's a great theft or an undiscovered theft. And that's what Marx said. He pointed to classical accumulation or primitive accumulation by military conquest, by insider political dealing. The Chicago school treats everybody's wealth as if people actually earned it rather than getting it from insider corruption or from theft. And crime basically pays better than any other industry, and that should be one of the starting points of economics. And they have a view of the world that's sort of a third grader's point of the world of how bunny rabbits make things and trade without any idea of cheating people or getting a free lunch or getting income without producing anything at all, but just paying oneself a bonus and getting a government bailout for it. That doesn't appear.
I'm speaking with financial economist and historian Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show, The New Junk Economics, From Democracy to Neoliberal Oligarchy. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. Could you talk a little bit about the labor theory of value?
The objective from the 13th century of economic theory was to say how much of price that people pay is actually necessary. In other words, what's the fair price for bankers to charge and for companies to charge? And they said, well, you have, first of all, the cost of labor, and then you have the price of the machinery and the raw materials you use, and all of these prices of machinery, raw materials, ultimately they're all resolvable into labor cost. So the classical economists had two basic tools. The labor theory of value is the theory of the intrinsic cost of producing goods and services, but then price theory was the excess of price over and above this value. And that price was economic rent or the free lunch, and that was interest, government taxes, and rent. And so essentially you would subtract the value from price and you'd get what was exploitative or a free lunch. Well, that was the economic theory that underlay the Sherman antitrust law in this country in 1890. It underlay utility regulations. It underlaid all of the government regulations of what phone companies, electric and gas companies could charge. They said, look, you can cover your cost in terms of what it actually costs you, but you can't get a free lunch except some interest that you pay, and somehow you're entitled to a fair rate of profit. So the labor theory of value is part of isolating that portion of the price that people pay and the incomes people got that was not earned.
Right. You write that economic rent and capital gains are income without a corresponding necessary cost of production.
Right. So they're not really value. They're empty pricing. They're prices and income without intrinsic value.
You go on to say that banks have lent increasingly to buy up these rentier rights to extract interest and less to promote industrial capital formation.
That's the problem with banking today, is the bankers have said, well, we have to carve up the public domain because the public doesn't borrow from the banks. Governments finance all this capital in every economy, and the biggest capital expenditure in any economy is the public expenses, the public infrastructure. Roads and the mineral rights, what in most countries were the public sector. And the bank said, look, we want to make interest on all of this, and the way we can make interest is to get this out of the public domain into private hands, and then we will lend the money for people to buy, say, the roads, and then put toll booths up on them. So the banking system has its interest in turning the economy into a toll booth economy rather than a production economy. So you have banks actually financing the loading down of the economy with empty prices, with prices people have to pay simply for access to roads. In Chicago, for instance, to avoid taxing real estate, the city has given the rights of putting parking meters all along the curbs to charge, and this now makes it people have to pay a lot more to park their cars cars for what used to be free parking along the curbs. The whole economy's being treated like that, and they're charging for water. They're charging for they charge for air if they could do it. They're certainly charging for land. They're charging for what used to be produced freely by nature, and therefore was kept in the public domain, or for natural monopolies like the phone system or the cable. And the banks are lending to whoever is going to buy these toll booth rights and just increase the charges that they're levying on the users. That's why living standards have not gone up here.
You say that it is a form of overhead, not a means of production. Won't this type of economy come to a screeching halt at some point due to a lack of production?
That's right. Somebody has to produce, and what America calls the post-industrial society is really just a rentier economy. It's a financialized economy where all of the surplus is shifted into Wall Street and the financial sector. It's not being invested in new factories and in tangible capital formation, plant, research and development, education. It's all being used essentially just to pay financial speculation.
So then is this why you have alluded to the possibility that we could be sinking back into a new feudalism?
That seems to be the objective, to channel all of the income over and above basic subsistence needs to an emerging oligarchy that will make itself hereditary and become an aristocracy.
Right, and you've also mentioned on the show before that it looks like people are going to be going back into a land-based subsistence economy.
Well, Europe is very well set up for this because most European families, especially in the former Soviet Union, have their own dachas, their own gardens in the country where they grow their own food. Very few Americans have their own gardens, and so they're dependent on the market for buying all of this. So the Europeans are set up for a market breakdown, especially in countries that didn't have a good market economy to begin with. The Americans are more dependent on market workings than anyone else, and so they're probably going to be squeezed the most.
What do you think about the talk of deficit reduction? How dangerous are government deficits, and are there two different types of deficits?
Government deficits are not dangerous at all. That's crazy to read. The whole basis of Keynesian economics is when you have an economic downturn, when the market's shrinking, then you need more spending. Now, Keynes said the government should fill the gap. When there's more unemployment, you've got to have enough spending so that there's a market for people to hire labor again. Instead, the government is shrinking the market by shrinking the deficit and cutting back government spending, except foreign military spending and spending on the banks. So what this means is that the markets are going to continue to shrink, and Mr. Bernanke said, the market is shrinking by the government, but this is wonderful because when the market demand shrinks, now people are going to have to borrow from the banks to break even and sustain their living standards. All these people who are unemployed are going to have to somehow take out loans or sell what they have, and that's our business, building up more bank loans. Well, of course, that's what Clinton did when Clinton ran a budget surplus. That stopped the government spending, and people borrowed more and more from the banks, and Clinton was the biggest friend the banks had since the Depression, and Bernanke wants to redo that sort of democratic policy by increasing people's debt, and he thinks that if the government doesn't spend, then people are going to borrow more from the banks and give them more business. And in fact, the banks aren't lending because who's going to lend to people whose real estate already is in negative equity, so they can't raise the mortgage anymore. They're not going to lend to people without a job. So the whole idea is self-destructive.
Yes, but then the deficits that they are accruing are going into, as you've mentioned, to loans to banks and military spending. So is that kind of deficit spending really dangerous?
It's dangerous for countries on the receiving end of the bombs and the Predator drones that the Americans are doing. It's dangerous for other countries, and it's empty debt here. It's debt that the government is now going to turn around and tax labor and industry to repay, and the taxes are going to increase the cost of living and doing business here, which will price American labor even more out of the market and make it even harder to export. So the dollar at some point is going to go way, way down, and all of a sudden sudden the Americans are going to find that the prices they have to pay for imports or for American goods that are competing with imports are going to go way up, and their income is not, and they're going to be squeezed like they've never been squeezed before. They don't seem